Hello everyone, this is a presentation on special education in the 90s brought to you by yours truly, Imani McCullough. So right into the first slide, we have legislation. The EHA, which stood for Education for All Handicapped Children Act, was changed to IDA in 1990. Also established in 1990, we have the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now that was more of a broader one, not exactly geared toward special education, but for Americans with disabilities in general. The IDA which stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it specified inclusion more than the EHA originally did and was revisited and expanded on, and each of these had. The EHA, once it was passed, it was a huge step in the right direction for education for children with disabilities. It ended the notion that exclusion would be tolerated and introduced IEPs. This meant that students would be accommodated based off of their disabilities specifically. So everything would be more individualized instead of broader, how it used to be. The IDA ended up being reformulated in 1997, and that the reformulation of it meant that FAPE was introduced, which stands for free and appropriate public education, and that was a requirement by every state. The IEPs were also expanded upon. Originally, when they had first started out, it was sort of like a broad term, and certain cases brought to light what exactly the IEP would mean for everyone. IEP. I keep saying that word, but I haven't actually gone more in depth with what it means, so here's the rundown. It is an individualized education program, which meant that each student had specific needs, and the states, everyone recognized that each student was different. Every student is unique, and what one might need in order to fulfill their education, another might not need. They might have more specific needs, they might have different needs. So the IEP was put in place so the IEP was put in place so that it was made sure that each children got the specific attention and education that they actually needed. IEPs, before everything is formed, a plan has to be made, a plan has to be enacted. So there's a team of people that come together. Team is formed and consulted with to form an educational plan for each child specifically. So within this team, you have the parent or guardian of the child, if they feel like the child should be there. Unless the child is 16 years of age, then it is a requirement for them to be there. At least one regular education teacher, at least one special education teacher, public agency representative, an interpreter if needed, and other services related to the individual. So let's say you have someone else, let's say it's a therapist or a counselor who knows the child, or someone who works closely with the child, knows the way the child thinks, knows the way they learn. So anyone who you think would be a good fit for being in there and a part of that meeting deciding how the children's educational plan should be formed can be there. And it doesn't have to be a meeting in person either. They want to make this as painless, as convenient for parents and families as possible. So if a parent cannot be there, you can form the team and meet via Skype calls. It does not have to be in person. It could be over the phone, everyone getting together and discussing this. Whatever is the best means of meeting together for the parent and the child. All right, so in these meetings, concrete goals are set in place. They have to be measurable, number one, for sure, measurable. Educational expectations to be met by the teacher and the instructor, meaning the tasks set in place aren't just saying, oh, the child is expected to meet this and the child is expected to meet that. It means that the instructor also has to keep on with the child. The instructor has to ensure that they are actually teaching the child this, and to watch closely to make sure that the child is actually learning and obtaining, because the instructor has to report. They have to make progress reports. They have to keep track of the growth and everything. So the instructor is every part of this as the child is. Now, that being said, for the IEP, since different kids have different means of learning, and since they have, within their limits, different educational goals that they can meet for, the goals set in place during these meetings have to be ones that the child can actually reach, ones that they know with this child's disability they will be able to reach. And it can't just be vague goals. You can't say, oh, okay, well, right now they can do this, and by the end we're gonna spot it for them to reach this amount, instead of like maybe for them to read like this much more, do this much more. It has to be like, no, not like they may be able to do this, like they will be able to do this. What I'm trying to say is it has to be obtainable. It has to be a goal that the child can actually reach, and it has to be something that they actually can use later on down the line. So you're not just doing what you think, oh, this will be easy for them, we're going to teach them this. It has to be something valuable. At the bottom, there is LRE. That stands for least restrictive environment. And that means that since inclusion is a huge part of incorporating the children and allowing them the right to get the education they rightfully deserve, that it should be in an environment that is not hindering or restricting them from being included with everyone else. So let's say they have a mixture of classes. Let's say they have some special education classes they take, and then there's certain classes where they're in regular classrooms. Instead of excluding the children or not having them participate, because is that these children have different disabilities, and some of them mean that children either speak out, they're louder than most. Let's say they have actual like tics, like face contortions and stuff that they make. Since it is a part of their disability, and since we are geared towards inclusion, that child is allowed to be in the classroom with other children. They are there to get their education just the same as anybody else. That is not a reason for them to be removed from the classroom. That's what we're saying. The child is not to be removed from the classroom unless it is found that everything, even with all the extra help they're getting or that they're allowed to receive, they're not learning. That, I believe, that is one of the sole reasons why they would be removed from the classroom. I don't think it was necessarily back then, but I do know that there is a newer rule set in place. I just wanted to touch base on it. You can look it up later on if you'd like. It's the 10-day rule. Well, unless it's just my teacher listening to this, then you already know all about this, but I'm just going to touch base on it. That is the 10-day rule, and it was put in place so that way children who do have disruptive, not necessarily disruptive behavior, but like violent tendencies, if they are to be suspended or taken out of a class, it can only be for up to 10 days, unless they have harmed themselves, I believe. Okay. So on to IDA eligibility. If you meet at least one of these, you are eligible to partake in IDA from birth on up to the age of 22, I believe. So they are autism, intellectual disability, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, deafness, deaf and blindness, hearing impairment, multiple disabilities, serious emotional disturbance, specific learning disabilities, visual impairment / blindness, orthopedic impairment, or other health impairments. Now, once the IEP meeting is set in place, underway, everything is good to go. If the parent does not end up agreeing with the IEP, like with the plan that was come up, and they think, oh, we need a different plan, they have every right to reject that plan. They have every right. So if a parent chooses to reject it, they can request a second opinion. That is called IEE, which stands for Independent Educational Evaluation, and that request is free of charge at the public's expense. So the parent has to write a notice for the request, and without necessary delay, the district either has to say yes and pay for a second opinion, so free of charge to the parent completely, or if they believe that their initial plan and everything is good, they can, I believe, write in and they can prove to a judge that the plan set in place and everything is exact, it's right, it's like to no fault, and then it'll be up to the judge to decide. All right, so based off of everything that I just discussed, we can conclude that the laws set in place and that were either already existing and just revamped or that just came into play improved the quality of education being taught to these children significantly. I provided 3 keywords and definitions at the bottom to remember when keeping in mind when thinking about the growth and progression of special education. Thank you for coming along this educational journey with me. That is the end of my presentation.